Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Simply Cyber Live. I am your host, Gerald Auger, and in the next hour, we are going to be diving deep on cybersecurity topic that I am really a big fan of, and I hope you are too. We're going to be talking about reverse engineering, malware analysis, software exploitation. We might dabble. I don't know. But we're going to be talking with Dr. Josh Stroschein, a personal friend of mine, a wonderful individual, incredibly smart when it comes to, assembly, disassembling binaries, understanding the current state of malware. He's absolutely brilliant. On top of that, he's an amazing educator, like to the point where I literally TA'd one of his classes in grad school just to be in his class. So I hope you're excited. Get your questions ready. It's going to be deep. We're going to do a technical demo. I think we were kind of getting that sorted out before we got started, but let's bring Josh in. Let's have a good time. I'm super pumped. Let's do it. All right, Josh, what's going on, man? You good?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Hey, chat, if Josh's audio or mic is too low, go ahead and share that in chat so we know, and he can throttle it up or do whatever he needs to do. So, Dr. Stroschein, as it were.
So we're
Yeah, so we're talking about reverse engineering like a boss. That's kind of how I pitched this episode for the chat, because I know some people have been your student in the past, but just for chat in a high level, can you just kind of explain a little bit about your background and why you are really a SME when it comes to reverse engineering?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I find SME a hard word. It's I guess I've always found cybersecurity to be one of those professions that the more I know, the more I realize it's the less I know. So
Hmm.
always learning. But I do enjoy reverse engineering. I think it's interesting that it's something that when I first got started in it, I didn't enjoy it as much as I do today. It really became a challenge that I set out to tackle because I just wanted to prove to myself that I could. And so over the course of time, I really got into RE just a few years ago, going through the same doctoral program with Jerry and getting into teaching. I wasn't doing it in industry before that time, although I'd spent all of my time kind of pre-academic period doing software development. So I think that certainly helped in that I was pretty comfortable with a lot of the concepts that I was going to encounter with reverse engineering, but I wasn't writing low-level languages. I wasn't writing in C. I wasn't certainly not doing any assembly. I hadn't touched assembly since college, the first time I went through. And so then as I got into teaching it, I realized that I really wanted that industry experience as well. And then I sought out through some really good friends like Jared DeMott. He provided me a lot of just amazing opportunities to start working for some companies. Bromium was the first that I
Hmm.
started doing real malware analysis, reverse engineering with. I actually started with them as an intern in my late 30s, something I never thought I would do. And just, from there, it was something that I spent a lot of time, a lot of my free time, a lot of my teaching time, a lot of my consulting time, just trying to figure out and unravel. And I've been doing it now ever since. So I still work with Bromium. It's actually got acquired by HP a few years ago. So HP Wolf, and I probably haven't been seriously in IDA now for a few months, so I'm trying to get better at that because I've let myself get distracted, but
Hmm.
and those skills perish quickly. At least for me, they do. So, um, but yeah, it's still a part of the role. And
Well,
it's
so
hard to
let
be
me
still.
ask you, like when I think of cybersecurity, even today, I think of corporate cybersecurity, right? And there's some fringe roles, like we talked about product management last week on the stream, but I think of security operations. I think of GRC, maybe a little bit of digital forensics as a skill within a SOC or incident responder, but doing true malware analysis, doing reverse engineering, to me that always felt like um, what's like, it's definitely a very niche skill,
Mhm.
but I never really understood what the job market was for it, right? And then after talking to people like you and TJ Nelson and stuff, like I know that there's jobs out there with, like, that's your job, you work in a lab and you do malware analysis, but what is the current market, I guess? Like let's say someone's like, oh, this is cool. I want to do this. I go get all the education. I'm super good at it. Like, what's the market for jobs for having those skills?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think you're going to find, and I haven't, maybe I don't have my finger as close as I used to on the industry pulse and the career postings, but I think you'll find that dedicated malware analysis, reverse engineering positions are maybe a little bit fewer and farther between than some of your more predominant roles that organizations are looking for. Your SOC analysts, your incident responders, if you've got software security, vulnerability research. In a lot of organizations, at least from my viewpoint, they're looking for a security team that can do all of the things.
Mm-hmm.
And if they need a reverse engineer or a dedicated threat research team that's actually tracking APTs or nation states or whatever, those tend to. Well, I mean, those are you know. I think different organizations that need those. I don't think every bank needs one, but if you're
Mm-hmm.
Proofpoint, well, you're tracking malware every day because you're writing rules. So it seems like from the folks I've talked to, as you progress through maybe as a SOC analyst, SOC 1, 2, 3, whatever the role may be, eventually you get to a point where you get added to a team that maybe that becomes a bigger part of the role, where you're
Mm-hmm.
spending more time doing reverse engineering or tracking malware. I also think too it comes with more experience. I certainly that there are going to be people that can just jump right into an RE role. But for me personally, it took a while to build up to it. There's a lot of things that I just didn't know I didn't know, and it just took a lot of time. So I think you'll see that. I've seen if I guess truth be told, I've applied for a few roles here and there throughout the years. Didn't decide to pursue some of them where I received an offer, but they were all probably more experienced roles that I never would have pursued had I just been at the beginning point of my career. So you might have to find, I think for someone who's new and looking for a position here, they might have to look for something that is a little bit more. I don't want to say entry level, but maybe that's the case with the viewpoint of I can see
Mm-hmm.
this growing into the reverse engineer position I want to be.
Yeah. And Josh, can you maybe turn your mic up just a little bit, if
Sure.
that's possible while I'm talking? So, all right. I've always thought that two things. One, like reverse engineering malware analysis is absolutely awesome. But like you said, I feel like you're a blue teamer and you dabble a little bit. And then eventually you get to an organization that's large enough to warrant having people do just that. Or you go work for a Google Project Zero or a
Hmm.
Cisco Talos or something like this. One of these kind of research think tanks where you're basically being paid to reverse stuff and find new malware so then the company can turn around and have signatures and be first to market with certain defensive mechanisms. So that's kind of how I've seen it. Again, I'll tell you what, Josh, from my perspective, right? So I do mostly GRC, but because I work for smaller teams, I have to do SOC analyst stuff. And when a piece of malware comes into my environment, I would love to reverse it, right? It's fun. Reversing's fun,
Hmm.
but I don't have time to do that. Like I need
Yeah.
to find out how bad this is, triage and move on and see if it's in my environment anywhere else and then move on because I got another problem I got to solve. So that's always been the struggle with me. But it sounds like there are opportunities. You just have to, like, I guess if you're in the industry, if you're in that RE role, do those companies kind of become more obvious? Like, are you in the know?
Yeah. So I think you're definitely right with the timeline. Like some of the classes I teach, whether university or private stuff, there's a whole bunch of material we can cover without ever touching, reverse engineering. And I think it's important too to frame RE because it can really take on a lot of different tools and a lot of different approaches. At the baseline, it's just taking something and reverse engineering the understanding of it. So you can get a malicious office document, you can RE the macros, you can get something in native code like a PE file, and you can reverse engineer that machine code. The tools you use are different. The time involved is going to be a lot different. The complexity is a lot different. There's so many things that are different. So, a lot of things, there are a lot of variables getting into it. If you think about, I always like to think of MITRE ATT&CK in terms of that complexity curve when you're analyzing artifacts on the left, that initial access and execution. As you move further right, just it just gets more difficult. That's where you encounter more of those native code binaries. You need tools like IDA. When you're far on the left still, you're using OLE dump and XLM deobfuscator and other things that, while it can still be complicated, they just in general tend to be a little bit easier.
Hmm.
I think once you get into industry, yeah, I think you definitely pick up a better pulse. You start to meet more people. The thing that's really surprised me, with this industry as large as it is, as you really find yourself and work your way into that niche, that place that you really enjoy working, or you spend most of your time working, you get to know a lot of the people that are out there doing it, and then they can help become mentors and guide you, or you work with or for different teams, and you get to view and experience that, and maybe then find those opportunities to either move on to another organization, or move on to another team within the same organization if it's a large enough one. Like Google certainly would have enough breadth in what they have for teams that if you
Hmm.
found something that caught your eye more, you'd be able to move in that direction. So I think it does certainly help, but it's the problem that I've seen in technology since I've started, is that it's just hard to get that initial start and really get out there and
Hmm.
start making those connections. Conferences are a great place. Things like this are an awesome place to go and listen and connect and reach out for mentorship or guidance to help you.
So real quick, since we're using the term reverse engineering, we're calling it RE also.
Is
Is
audio
revert? What's that?
is the audio better?
I think so. Yeah.
Everything is fighting me today. I don't know why. The audio sucks. I can't share my screen. Everything.
Well, we'll get through it. It'll be good.
No.
So we say RE, we say reverse engineering. Those terms are synonymous. You may have also heard of it as malware analysis, right? So, Josh, just to kind of level set, I mean, would you call malware analysis and reverse engineering synonymous? And they're okay. You answer the question, because now as I'm asking it, I'm realizing the difference. But you tell me.
Right. Yeah. No, I'd say malware analysis oftentimes requires reverse engineering. But reverse engineering it has other applications. I think you already touched on it. You have like Project Zero and vulnerability research. That's an application for reverse engineering. Validating that you're doing the best you can to protect intellectual property and software. So there's definitely other applications in it, and it doesn't necessarily have to involve software. I mean, there's hardware stuff. There's reversing network protocols. I mean, there's
Hmm.
other applications. So I would say, for malware analysis, it's a skill that you don't need right away. But I think if you want to experience the full career, it's something that you'll want to start working on right away, and have a plan to grow your RE capabilities and what you can do as you're working through some of the other responsibilities and skills that malware analysts need.
So one of the things you mentioned already is, you could RE a macro virus, right? Or you could reverse a binary, like a Microsoft PE file. So
Mhm.
let me ask you this: in the pantheon of reversing, and really the marketability of it, right? Because at the end of the day, like, it's fun to do this stuff, but it's better to get paid doing this stuff.
Yeah.
Do you recommend people, or do you see it in industry that everybody becomes a jack of all trades? So I could reverse an Android APK file, I could reverse a PE file, macro, or is it more like bug bounty on the offensive side, where like you basically just become the Android APK reverser? That's like what you do. Like what do we see? Jack of all trades or a master of one?
Uh, well, I don't know. I guess I would say that there is. I mean, for me, I focus on the areas that were the most relevant, or at least what I felt were the most relevant. PE files in Windows, because that's where a lot of the malware is, because that's where a lot of industry's at. So,
Hmm.
definitely, if you have an interest in Android APKs or iOS apps or another area, I think it's going to be where you start to focus and start to and create your niche. But definitely, when you build I think there's an overall methodology to reverse engineering, and as you build that experience. Let's say you pick 32-bit Intel because you want to look at Windows stuff. Well, as you understand the tools and the process and how internals of the operating system work, and how instruction sets work, and how to reverse engineer those, then in my opinion, it becomes easier to apply those to a 64-bit environment or an ARM environment, or
Hmm.
trying to learn Android or iOS. They're going to, of course, be different, but I think there'll be a lot of conceptual similarities that'll make that transition easier. So I think it's probably best to pick one and start there, and then gravitate or reach it, branch out into different technologies as the situation dictates to you. I think Windows and Intel is a great place to start because, again, that's just where most organizations are at in their networks, with having Windows hosts and Windows environments. And 64-bit, obviously that's probably more predominant at this point in time. But the jump from how 32-bit to 64-bit stuff works is really, again, it's not terribly complicated. So pick one or the other. Understand it, learn it, and you'll be set. I mean, if you start with 32-bit, just nothing, it's not an extensive amount of change to then upgrade yourself to understanding 64-bit, or just start 64-bit. Whatever. I just pick one and go.
Just get in.
Yeah.
So PMA, practical malware analysis, considered a seminal text in our space around learning malware analysis. And the No Starch Press book on IDA, in my opinion, is considered the book for IDA. So for people who are interested in even seeing if reversing is what they're into or what they like, what kind of resources would you recommend? I mean, obviously you can do a class, but I mean, are there some seminal videos, some seminal text, some seminal content that is, the answer to this question?
The texts you mentioned those are great places to start. PMA, I think, is 10 or 11 years old now, and so even though it's a bit dated, it still is a great place to start. The fundamentals are all there, and it will get you moving in the right direction. A lot of folks have, PMA comes with a lot of sample programs, and again, you're going to look at, I think, Poison Ivy and say, well, that's an old piece of malware. Yeah, but a lot of the things are still the same. A lot of the techniques and tools to go analyze it. So it's a great place to start. All the samples.
I'm sharing it right here on stream so you can see it. This is the PMA book. You can see I bought it in 2016. So.
Yeah, right. There's a lot of good write-ups to the guide. I mean, the book comes with a walkthrough, a detailed walk. I think half of the book is lab walkthrough, and then of course many people over the years have solved those and provided their own kind of viewpoint into solving these with more modern versions of the same tools or something. IDA Pro, Ghidra, Chris Eagle has now an updated Ghidra book. The Ghidra book, I believe, is out there. So pick one or the other, I would say, and jump into it. I'm still an IDA person. I'm using an old version of IDA, but it's where I started, and I think there are still just a few benefits to it that I like. Plus, I'm just more comfortable with it. Ghidra has a decompiler, definitely a very powerful thing to have in your reverse engineering arsenal, because going from assembly to disassembly, from disassembly to something a little bit higher like C, that can make your comprehension of the code a little bit quicker. But if you're learning, I would definitely recommend starting with the assembly, because the decompilers are not always going to be right. Sometimes they lie, and your ability to reverse will be that much stronger if you have that assembly foundation. You don't have to be an assembly developer. I don't write assembly code, except I do write a little bit of shell code every now and again. But it's not something I do on a regular basis to write fully featured programs using assembly. So you don't have to get to that level, but understanding how to write and how it works will definitely increase your ability to be a proficient reverse engineer.
Yeah, well, let me ask you that. So, I came up on IDA also, right? And you did too. And when Ghidra came out, I downloaded it and I tried it. And it's really, in my opinion, it is a powerful tool, and it can give you that C feel. But I feel like Ghidra was designed for like team analysis, right? Like it's decentralized, and you can have multiple people working on a binary. So I personally like IDA, but based just on the functionality and the ease of use, if you can somehow remove your bias towards IDA, and IDA still might be the same answer, which one do you think is more accessible to someone who has no experience with either?
Oh yeah, accessibility. Well, again, it kind of depends a little bit. IDA's open source, Ghidra's open source. So there's essentially no barriers into getting access to it. It's developed by the NSA. It's supported by them. It's super easy to get it up and running and install. I think it's Java. So there's really no barriers there. IDA is still a commercial product, and while they've certainly taken some competition from Ghidra, getting into IDA, there's free and demo versions. There's some educational licenses that you can get if you're in a college or university, but To get full blown IDA, there's going to be a paywall that you're going to hit, and it's still a pretty steep one. So when you look at getting into IDA, well, if you're doing 32-bit Intel, I think even 64-bit binaries now, but it's gonna limit the file formats that it parses for you. So starting with Windows and Windows-based malware, it's still a pretty good route to go because it's going to support all of that, at least the majority of it. But if you just don't want to worry about any restrictions, Ghidra is a really great, a really great alternative too. So
Okay.
I'd say
Yeah,
they're
well,
both
let me
fairly accessible.
pull up a comment. Okay, so like Binja, like someone
Yeah.
obviously is upset that I didn't pull out some love for Binary Ninja. What do you have any thoughts about Binary Ninja? It is an alternative. But what are your thoughts on Binary Ninja too?
Yeah. It's another great tool. It's another great alternative. I haven't used it in quite some time, so I'm not really sure 100% where their model is at right now. Last I knew, they had a demo version that you could use,
Mhm.
and then a premium. They had a premium model that you could upgrade to. So it seems like it has, like other disassemblers out there. It's got a powerful user interface. It's got a powerful disassembly engine. I think it does some decompiling. I just have lost track. I think as to where
Yeah,
that project is at. So the Ghidra and IDA are the ones that are always going to come up. They're kind of industry standard, I would say. If you're new to RE, it's just as well to start there. But a lot of these tools are all going to provide very similar capabilities. And for someone who's new, you probably don't need all of the greatness that they might offer. If you're just learning the basics and the fundamentals, which can be more painful. Like I said, I would start by learning the assembly, the disassembly output. Don't worry about the decompiler quite yet. You don't really have to worry about that. Then when you land that job and you're working for big tech corporation, they can
hmm
purchase you whatever license that you want, and then you've got the full blown IDE at your disposal.
yeah, and we're gonna. So I always found, at least back in the day, I found Binary Ninja to be more of a tool designed for senior level pros, like you've already done like disassembly and reverse engineering, like what the workflows are, because the interface was a lot less feature rich. I found like you had to know what you wanted, where IDA, it kind of just lays it all out there. We are getting a lot of like I guess my bias of IDA versus Ghidra is showing, so now we're talking about no love for DN Spy. So
Yeah, well,
sorry.
Spy is a kind of, it's a different class of RE tools. DN Spy is going to be your .NET binaries, and I wouldn't
hmm
use IDA Pro for .NET because .NET's an interpreted language. It's good. Well, it uses a PE file. The code inside of it, there's enough native code to kind of bootstrap it into the .NET runtime, but then it's all bytecode from there. So what you're looking at then is the interpreter, or however, I've never dug into exactly how it works, or at least in Microsoft's implementation of it. But you want a DN spy to decompile that bytecode, because then you're going to get C# or VB.NET or whatever
hmm
language you want. So they're definitely, DN spy is still my go-to. Last I looked, the project was archived on GitHub, so I'm not sure if somebody's picked up the maintenance on that, but that's been my go-to for .NET, reversing .NET binaries for a while. Java is another thing. It's its own interpreted bytecode. You've got to find a tool for Java.
hmm
Radar 2, I've used it. I just don't use it extensively. It just hasn't worked its way into my workflow. So definitely there's a lot of really good options. I think that's the cool thing about getting into RE. You don't need to be overwhelmed by the options there, but there are a lot of cool options. And so if you find yourself doing something, it's like, gosh, maybe I could automate this task, or maybe I could script this out, or maybe it'd be better to do this not in a GUI. There probably is a framework that does it if the current tool you're using doesn't provide that capability. So a lot of great open source options, but I agree with you. Some of them are going to require a little bit more knowledge and experience to really get in and utilize their capabilities.
I love it. And okay, so chat, I see you guys. You guys are all dropping like incredibly great questions. So I'm going to start firing off to Dr. Josh here. Real quick, just as a programming note, that some random LinkedIn user was asking if this is going to be recorded. Yes, absolutely. If you go to Simply Cyber's YouTube channel, you will be able to watch this indefinitely until YouTube goes down. All right. So Josh, couple questions coming from chat here. Tom Pike, thanks for the modding, Tom. Is there a prevalent language that you're seeing in malware?
It's Yeah, I would say the majority. I'm kind of guessing here. I don't have data to back it up, so this is just
Hmm.
anecdotal kind of gut feeling. I'd say it's still native code. So somebody's writing something in C or C++. So when you're reversing it, you're getting that disassembly. 32-bit, 64-bit. I don't know if I can say too if it's switched. I mean, for years up until recent, it's been a lot of 32-bit stuff with some 64-bit being sprinkled in. The reason being that 64-bit systems have backwards compatibility with 32-bit, so you can write for either. But the market share, I think most systems now being sold are 64-bit. You see, a fair bit of .NET, a little bit. I would probably argue a little bit easier to develop in, so maybe that's why you see some .NET. So .NET, something in C# or something originally. And
Hmm.
then, Java from time to time. On occasion, you'll see binaries that are written in a language like Rust or Golang. Probably not Rust so much. I don't know why I thought of that, but Golang for sure. And that provides its own whole series of challenges because reversing that, again, you're looking at the disassembly from that binary, but now you've got this whole Go runtime that's embedded into it. So discriminating between the logic that the malware authors wrote and just the overhead of the Go runtime can be a lot harder to separate those two. So just the Golang binary itself is a bit more of a challenge to reverse. But I don't think again, I don't know the stats on those. They're going to come across as PE files, so you got to just dig a little bit into the structure to identify if it is
Hmm.
written in Golang. But you definitely want to do that because the first steps I take before trying to tackle anything is what type of file am I using, the right type of tools, and then there's this whole process of identifying obfuscation. Is it packed? And if it is packed, how do I unpack it?
Hmm.
That's what I was hoping to go through today, if we can get the screen to share. But
Okay,
we can
that'll
still
be
talk
fun.
through it. It'll be fun to talk through it as well. So those would be the most. Linux is definitely an issue. If you look at if you go to the URL house on abuse.ch, they have a statistics page, and I use the URL house and abuse.ch for all sorts of research. So it's a great place if you haven't been there, particularly with malware. They've got a statistic page, and they tag all the binaries that come up. Yeah, so if you go to statistics and then just scroll down a little bit, you'll see top tags. Well, a little bit further. Most delivered payload, and then top tag. So you can see their top tag is ELF, which is
That's interesting.
your executable linking format. So those are Linux binaries.
Yeah, that's
And
really interesting.
yeah, my assessment is because a lot of those binaries are part of botnets and IoT hardware that's out there that are being compromised. So that's another one. I mean, if you're interested in looking at IoT centric malware, since those tend to be Linux-based systems, well, then you'll want to learn the ELF file format and some of the intricacies of reverse engineering on a Linux platform. Which, again, there'll be a common overlap, I think, of skills and techniques, but it's different. And in all the years I've been doing this, not that many years, I have not spent a lot of time with Linux.
Yeah, so you can have a very successful career just in with PE files. So
Yeah.
speaking of that, Matea is asking, do you recommend some courses or certifications straightforward to reverse engineering for a beginner, or stepping back and like learning C and then assembly and then going from there? And it looks like he wants to focus on PE reversing, which is right up your alley, Josh.
Yeah. I had a very unconventional, I think, foray into getting into RE. Because I was at a university and I was able to teach courses on C and assembly. And again, I didn't have any real background in C. I think in college we learned Java, and then as a software developer, I did a lot of .NET stuff. So yeah, I think if you can learn a little bit of C, you can learn a little bit of assembly. You want to learn probably more assembly than C, but definitely those two I think are good languages to start. C++ as well, and building that foundation on how to write basic C programs, how to write basic assembly programs, then get into taking the binaries, compiling them, reversing them. I think that's a great place to start. I wouldn't suggest just going out and grabbing malware and trying to disassemble it and learn from it, because you're not only dealing with likely what is a fairly complex program, but now you're gonna have packing, you're gonna have obfuscation, you're gonna have anti-analysis. So unless you're ready to tackle those, it just gets really complicated really fast. So
Hmm.
yeah, definitely write some C programs, find a good text. C's been around forever, so there's a lot of good courses out there. There's a lot of good texts out there. Um, there's a good PDF, Dr. Paul Carter. If you search for him, he's got a PDF for assembly, and that's actually the PDF that I used for my assembly class when I taught it. And it's nothing extensive. It just covers all of the basics. Here's your registers. This is what bitness looks like. These your bitwise operations. This is how you write basic programs. And
I mean, it doesn't get much straighter than this.
yeah, I mean it's a great place to start, and it's just right to the point. So that's a good PDF. I've got some content on Pluralsight on YouTube. I'm happy to provide those links if there's an opportunity for it. But I would definitely do that. I also on my GitHub, I have a bunch of simple C programs that you can take and you can look at the source. You can compile those using Visual Studio. Then you can reverse engineer the binary and you can compare the two. So start with the basics, just figure out how to write simple C programs. Yeah, if you go back to my listings, my repos, learning RE. So the second one down on the right-hand column. Yeah, there you go. It's nothing fancy. I just threw a bunch of stuff up there. Control structures, the third folder down, you'll see there's a bunch of simple programs, and that's the idea. If you can pick any one of these, they're meant to cover a specific topic. What does an array look like? Well, this is what it looks like in C. Now you can compile that and see what it looks like in IDA. And IDA, Ghidra, all they're showing you is the disassembly, so the assembly. So understanding how that looks in assembly and understanding what the compiler does to it too, because the compilers will oftentimes, like a C program will run through a compiler and it might change the way that you would expect the program to look once you've disassembled it, versus if you maybe write a program in assembly and use an assembler that doesn't change the structure of your code as much. So there's a lot of little things that come up. And I say, oh yeah, just start with C, just start with assembly, just start with a little C++, right? This is why getting into RE can take a little bit of time, because there are a lot of concepts that have to come together before. For me, it just took a long time before I even felt remotely competent and comfortable doing it, because there was just so much stuff that I'd have to stop and go research and go look up. And well, what does an array look like in assembly? And it's different because arrays, they're just a contiguous block of memory. And when you look at them in C, I think it's conceptually a lot easier, because you have the object that represents the array, and then you have an index into that array. Well, if it's an array of shorts, or integer values, well, it's just a chunk of memory, 4 bytes by 4 bytes by 4 bytes. And so when you look at accessing an array in assembly, the how that array is accessed is a little less clear, until you recognize the syntax. So
yeah, and the metaphor that's coming to my mind is it's like you want to hike the Appalachian Trail, so you just run out and get on the trail and start hiking, and then you quickly realize, like, you didn't pack the right stuff, you didn't wear the right clothes, you didn't think about the weather, you didn't do any prep, and you basically don't know what the heck you're doing, and you're kind of having a miserable experience. It's very similar, like to what you said. Yes, you can download malware and open it in IDA and look at it, but if you're not equipped, you're going to have a really poor experience. So I definitely agree with you 100% there.
yeah, if you find yourself in IDA or Ghidra, just you substitute any tool that you like to use. If you find yourself doing the hunt and peck, where you're just clicking around hoping something's going to stand out, it probably won't, because it's just not going to be, in a lot of cases, it's not going to be that obvious. If you open a piece of malware and it's packed and you're just poking around the code, well, you're probably looking at the unpacking logic, and maybe you want to figure that out in detail because you want to write your own unpacker. Odds are, though, you just want to get the unpacked binary out. So you want to skip over as much of that as possible. Yes, there are easier ways. Maybe you find you can do it in a sandbox. Maybe you find you can do it with a debugger. And that's part of the skill set too, especially when it comes to malware, is then knowing when tools like IDA or Ghidra are not the right fit. And maybe there is a better tool to accomplish whatever you're set out to accomplish. So that's another thing that comes with time. And like I said, I wouldn't just start by grabbing a big old binary and trying to RE it. I would recommend starting with those smaller programs, understanding how it works from the source code level, disassembling it, comparing the two. I found that for me to be a much easier way
Mhm.
to build that
Well,
proficiency in
it
it.
starts giving you the building blocks, so you know,
Yeah.
like, what the fundamental pieces look like. So then I almost feel like when you look at least in IDA, right? When you look at IDA, and by the way, if chat, you guys don't know what IDA is, it's a disassembly tool. It has a very familiar looking interface. When you see it, you know it. I'll pull it up in a second. But instead of looking at lines of code, at least in the PhD, this happened for me. You start seeing blocks of code, right? You're not looking at individual lines. You're looking at blocks, and you're like, okay, like this is the start of the PE file, or this right here is obviously encryption, right? Like you can see the XORs and the loops and stuff. So you start building blocks, and then you start seeing structures and stuff like that. You did mention something a second ago, Josh, about packers and obfuscation and stuff. Nick has a great question. Talk about anti-reverse engineering techniques, how frustrating they are, maybe some evolution. So yeah, I'll leave you to it.
Yeah. So again, it really depends. You kind of anticipate and expect when dealing with anything malicious or that you suspect is malicious, you're going to run into anti-analysis. You're going to run into obfuscation. The techniques applied with malicious Office documents are going to be different because of the technology that's at play there than the techniques you'll find in those native code files like your PE files. So it's really going to depend on what you're analyzing, what you're looking at. Um, you know, kind of the sequence of operations too, where they're looking for sandbox environments or where they're looking for the right environment. You might find more like on the Maldoc side. A lot of that stuff, there's just enough obfuscation to make extraction of important IOCs frustrating. So Maldocs are going to be typically your downloaders, and they're going to just obfuscate those URLs enough so that we can't just automate the extraction, or if we do, they change it every 2 weeks or something. When you get into the native code payloads, now that's the thing that's going to try to persist in the environment. It's going to move laterally. It's going to be beaconing out to C2. It's going to drop other payloads. So that's going to be more more armored in a way. So it depends on where you're at. If we just focused on native code payloads, for example, packing is typically one of the first things that you'll encounter. You take your program that you want to be your malware. Now you've got it all written and ready, and you've got all sorts of anti-analysis in that. Now you pack it inside something else. Sometimes it's pretty clear cut. UPX comes to mind. You take a program like UPX, it takes your original binary, it packs it into another executable. Now, when we analyze that executable, we have the code that is the unpacking stub. It unpacks that original binary, loads it into memory, and executes it. But that's probably the most ideal case. Not only if you find something that's using UPX, because then you can use UPX to unpack it, but that it has that simple and clear unpacking process. The more complicated packing, I think you get into stuff that's using shell code, and it's just the flow is a lot more complicated as it's unpacking resources and executing that. So it can be a lot less clear as to what's going on. From there, you name it, if you can think of it. The Excel documents, Excel form macros have been pretty prevalent for the last couple of years. And I don't know why this is the case. I haven't quite figured this out, but the Excel docs versus Word documents using VBA style macros, in those Excel docs, they do a lot of anti-analysis. They look at things like screen resolution. Does this system have a mouse? Can it play audio? Is this actually Windows? And then as you get into like the native code payloads, there might be some geolocation stuff, but a lot of the anti-analysis is just preventing and disrupting your ability to disassemble the binary or to run it in a sandbox, because it's looking to make sure that it's not in a sandbox environment. And those can have profound impact on your tools. The sample I wanted to look at today, we were going to do a little bit of unpacking if all would have gone well, and then there's some tricks that they throw in there for disassembly, and it trips up IDAPRO in this case, so that the disassembly listing becomes inaccurate. And if you don't recognize that, then you end up thinking that output that you see is correct, and it just takes you nowhere. And you have to be able to recognize that, correct the output, so that you can see the actual flow of the program. And sometimes, like when I'm looking at stuff statically and it doesn't make sense, then I'll follow along in a debugger, and then the debugger, because again, the debugger is the truth data. That's what the
Hmm.
CPU is executing. So if things aren't matching up in my debugger as they are in my disassembler, something's going on, and I need to dig a little bit deeper into figure out what that problem is.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point. I meant to mention it earlier when you were talking about, whether you should learn C assembly, et cetera. Another thing that I just feel it's important to comment is that I would recommend you don't have to take an entire course on computer architecture, but I
Mhm.
think it's worth understanding, like as nerd as it sounds, it's worth understanding how a computer actually works, like how things are read into memory and put on the CPU and processed, and
Yeah.
registers and instruction pointers and stuff like that. Because if you don't understand how code actually executes on a computer, it's important to understand it, because that's the way that the malware is going to operate as well. So I think it's important to understand that.
Yeah, definitely. Oh gosh, I forget the author's name, but there's the whole set of Windows internals, and
Hmm.
like,
Mark Russinovich.
yeah, they're on my shelf. Yeah, it is Rasinovich. Yeah, of course. Why wouldn't it be me?
Nailed it.
Uh, um, yeah, they're again. I don't know if there's more updated versions than what I have at this point, but I certainly didn't read through those cover to cover, because it spans a couple volumes at least.
Yeah.
But I have found them to be very helpful, and then, like you said, learning more of the internals of the operating system. Not to become an expert at how operating systems work, but even when I started, I wasn't real clear on the difference between PE files on disk and PE files in memory, and where everything was executed, and understanding virtual memory and how that is managed. I don't really care about, and I've never had to care about, the physical memory. Although if I was doing more incident response, I don't do a lot of incident response, and I was pulling actual content from physical RAM disk, or for memory, physical memory, I might have to care more about how that is utilized and how it was mapped to the operating system. So yeah, and I don't, I don't want it to sound overwhelming, because it can be, but yeah, I think somebody made the comment here. A lot of professions are the same way. You
Hmm.
just want to have a plan, and I think having discussions like this, well, this is where I would recommend starting, and these are things I would recommend looking at, can help to just provide a more methodical, streamlined, maybe even enjoyable, a career progression into getting into
Hmm.
RE, because it is a lot of fun. I always, especially with malware, I see it like a big game of chess, and that there's always something new to learn. There's always a change in tactics. There's always a change in obfuscation. I don't feel like I'm anywhere near the point of I've learned everything I can about this. I still feel like I'm at the foothills of the mountain looking up, going, "Jeepers, how much more
Yeah.
do I have
Every
to?"
time you every time
Every,
you reach the top of a mountain, you see the next mountain,
yeah,
basically.
yeah,
And
yeah.
Jess mentions that it's the ultimate puzzle challenge. It really is. I said it
Yeah.
earlier, and I meant it. Like, in my professional work, I don't have the luxury, the time, or really the 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 ability where it would make sense to do reversing and malware analysis, but I love it. It is so much fun. Um, so Tom Pike asked a really great question, and you could probably have a quick answer on it. But how much horsepower do you need? Like, do you need a big rig? Do you need a Cray supercomputer to to get into this?
Yeah, at least 6 GPUs.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you can get away with pretty little. I'm usually reversing out of a VM, so maybe a 4 gigs, and that's probably because Windows is taking up the majority of it. I don't know the footprint of IDA. I don't usually have to worry about it too much. So I'm usually in a VM. I have some old laptops. I'm fortunate enough to have some old laptops lying around. I use those a lot of times. When you get into malware analysis, you definitely want to think a lot about your lab environment and making sure that you have good separation from the systems that you're using to do your analysis versus the ones that you use on your everyday. Be very careful with that. But really, yeah, you don't really need a whole lot of resources. As I've gotten, I suppose, more, I don't know. I mean, over the years, I certainly appreciate having a better system. I have a
Mhm.
tower here that I use, 64 gigs of RAM, nice drives, and again, I think the reason that I appreciate having all that is because then I can have multiple VMs running. The time to restore from snapshots and load VMs from disk is a lot
Mhm.
quicker. I just don't have to worry too much about it. Having like sandboxes at home and stuff, that's a whole other thing to consider. And that gets to be a lot more complicated. But even with that, you don't necessarily need a real beefy system. I have an ESXi server that sits in the closet. I use that from time to time. Again, commodity hardware. I think I could only put 64 gigs of RAM and a terabyte solid state, but it's a great tool to have at home.
Yeah. So Barzan asks, what can we do today to learn reverse engineering malware analysis? You said earlier a little bit like maybe get a little bit of C, a little bit of assembly before you go pull a malware and drop it. But I want to take an opportunity. You can answer this question, Josh, but I also want to. I know you have put content on your YouTube channel, and I don't know if it's playlist where it's like a course or something like that. So do keep in mind as you respond to this any resources that you've developed personally, because I know for a fact you have.
So I have some paid content. If you go to Pluralsight, I have a course getting started in reverse engineering. It's probably my most popular course, and it outlines a lot of this that we're talking about. I think I was supposed to make it an hour and a half, and it ended up being like a 3 hour course. So that's certainly something to look at. I have other courses around malware analysis there. There usually is a free April. I don't know if that's happening this year. So, if you're kind of like you mentioned PMA, and I wanted to point out too, there's the humble book bundles that come out all the time, and you'll be able to pick up content really, really cheap or even free sometimes. So that's no different there with Pluralsight. YouTube, yes, I have a couple playlists. One playlist is learning assembly. Another is learning reverse engineering. Those are old videos from my class I used to teach at DSU. I mainly made them available for future classes and anybody else that stumbled across them. They're not necessarily the best production quality, and some of the content I had to chop out because it just didn't make sense trying to live on its own in that playlist. But you'll definitely learn quite a bit of the fundamentals there. I am trying to get some courses in C and C++, but I just haven't quite found the time to do that. And I'd really love to redo the intro to RE and the learning assembly. Oh, I do have a learning C course. So
which ones are you saying people should check out? This intro to reversing?
There's that one. There's learning C and there's learning assembly. So those bottom four, ignore the intro to web dev. Those three are a good place to start. They're not 100% complete because they were in the context of a course, but here you'll see this will cover a lot of the basics of assembly. So if you haven't done
this is great though, because it's in order, it's built on top of it. This is a course.
Yeah, it is. And it covers all the main things that you'll want to understand getting into assembly. Similar with C. I mean, you're not going to be a C developer coming out of watching those videos, but you'll have a much better understanding how to get started. And then from there, pick up a book like PMA. I think always books. I think a lot of folks find books to be helpful because it helps them lay out a roadmap or a plan. This is the content I'm going to cover. These are the concepts in each chapter. These are the tools that they're talking about. You might have to find modern day equivalents, but you'll find them. And then there's those samples on GitHub. I'd say once you've built a little bit of a baseline, it's great to just go grab those, compile them, disassemble them, start tracing through. And I mean, even if you wanted to, I guess, to skip all that other stuff, you could just take one of those sample programs, you could compile it, disassemble it, and just whenever, because this is what I ended up doing a lot too. I'm stuck on this. I don't understand this sequence of instructions. So now I got to stop. I got to reference the Intel manuals to figure out what does that instruction do. And I got to start building the context around that instruction, because when you look at a program in C, one line can say a lot. Multiple lines can say a lot more. In assembly, it's just one instruction. And so that one line of C might become several lines of assembly that you've got to kind of gel back together in your mind and figure out what it actually represents. So you could certainly do that. I just think that would be a more, it just was a little more frustrating for me just looking at that IDA Pro output and going, all right, I don't understand any of this.
So that's for beginners, right? And those are some great resources that we just shared. Matt asks, so he's an experienced engineer. He knows assembly, but he's new to cyber. So he's got a lot of those foundational pieces that you got in. What do you recommend for someone who's kind of that user?
Well, Well, as far as a tool, I don't know. I come back to that IDA Ghidra. I don't think you can go wrong there. There's a lot of areas that they're going to be fairly similar. Um, I, I think a lot of colleagues still use IDA. I mean, you just can't go wrong. It's just the license. So if cost is prohibitive, then you have to work around that, which is where Ghidra is a good alternative. But between the two, I think you just really can't go wrong there. Even Binary Ninja. Again, I don't use that for a lot of my malware reverse engineering, so I just can't speak too much to it where maybe I would find it frustrating or not. But with IDA, you've got the plugin capability to write plugins. It's been out there for a long time too, so there's other plugins that you can take advantage of and look for and use, add it into your workflows there.
Mm-hmm.
Ghidra, since it's newer, it has extensions, it has plugins, and it comes with quite a few. It comes with some good docs. It's not hard to get up and running with it. I think you can write them in Python as well. Same with IDA, you can write your plugins in Python, so it makes that ease of getting up and running with it a lot easier. Um, and then the thing
yeah,
I like probably the
yeah,
most
go ahead.
still with IDA is it has a pretty good integration with the debugger. So if you've got the professional version, you've got a license, you can integrate with WinDebug. I'm comfortable and I like WinDebug. I'm probably one of the few, but you get a really good and integrated, tightly coupled debugging experience. I know Ghidra is working on it, at least what they're releasing publicly. I don't know how good it is. I think it's still very much in its infancy, but again, it kind of depends on how much of your workflow you really want to streamline and how much you don't mind jumping around in tools. Usually if you're doing it day in and day out, you want to streamline as much as possible.
Yeah. And, for beginners or more seasoned experienced people, and I feel like the seasoned experienced people would benefit more from this, but you could take a piece of malware that's like, well defined, like WannaCry or Mirai botnet or something like that. And there's definitely videos online of people disassembling them, people who do what you do, Josh, and almost like a walkthrough. So, that's another good way, at least one way that I like to learn is, basically like a follow along or ride along where you can, spend a minute, mess with it, and then look at what they do and be like, oh, okay, like I get it.
Yeah, definitely. That's another resource I used, was to look for write-ups. A lot of security companies that have security teams. Oh gosh, what's his name? Marcus Hutchinson.
Oh, Mark. Yeah.
Yeah. He I don't know if he still blogs a lot, but he's had a lot of really, really good write-ups. It's not, it's not always easy. I find with reversing, even I mean, I've written some. I was looking at an old lab I wrote up before this video, trying to follow along with it, and it's hard sometimes to capture every single step. So you can find yourself trying to follow along this person's blog or their write-up and still running into, well, how exactly did they get from point A to point C? There's got to be a point B in here, but there's enough of them out there that have all of those details. You've got to get the samples too, and usually that's not a problem. There's enough resources online to search for those malware samples and download them. Usually on the write-ups, they put the hashes. Hey, we're gonna look at malware X, and here's the hash of the sample that we're gonna look at today, so you can go download it if you want. So it makes getting access to pretty much everything fairly easy. And then of course there's some YouTube videos that you can follow along to, and so I think that's another good place to look. Some of the things that you might not get, like if we were talking about unpacking, there is I think a fair bit of art that comes with it. Like how did you know to skip all this code and get to this next location and stuff that might be a little bit lost in some of the technical write-ups. So
yeah, that's where I get lost. I did enough to get through the program, but I am not going to become a professional reverse engineer anytime soon. We are. So by the way, I looked at Marcus's blog. I pulled it up. It looks like he hasn't posted since November 2021. So it's been, a good 5 months. So I don't know if he's taken a break or whatnot, but I dropped that in chat also for everybody. Josh, and guys, like I love all the questions. I know we don't have time to get to all of them, but really fun question that Nick Aloha asks. He says, what's the most interesting malware family sample to reverse? I'd also be curious if you have any stories of, interesting war stories, if you will, of analyzing malware or either dynamically or statically.
The most interesting, I don't know. I think it's all interesting to some degree. Most of it, if you look at I'd say probably the more capable criminal actors and our nation states, they're probably going to offer the more sophisticated tools.
Hmm.
Malware that uses, some of them will use a virtual machine for a packing mechanism. Those are really difficult because much like we talked about with .NET binaries, they're interpreting the bytecode, and if we don't know what that virtual machine is, then you have to understand the actual instruction set that they're using, and so those can be really challenging. I think there's one guy I met. I can't think of his name right now. He teaches a lot at Hack in the Box, and that's sort of his expertise area, is dealing with virtual machine based packing. So it's one of those niche areas. Some of the more commodity stuff that maybe you see floating around everywhere, LokiBot comes to mind. That's not to say that it's easy to reverse, but you'll probably find that the packing mechanisms that they use and some of the others tend to be a little bit easier once you've gained some experience there. One of the most interesting things I came across, that's been a couple of years now. I actually there's a blog post out there somewhere on the Bromium or HP website. It was a sample that, after spending a fair bit of time just tracing through the unpacking process, I would get to a point where things just fell apart. And I couldn't understand why, because I was tracing it in a debugger, I was tracing it in IDA, and it would make this jump or this return, and everything would just stop. My debugger would just stop, and I didn't understand. But after pondering it a little bit and then realizing the difference, it was using a return F instead of just a regular return. What it was doing is it was jumping from 32-bit to 64-bit code. And because I was using a 32-bit debugger, I couldn't continue the debugger, so it would just crash. The debugger didn't crash; it just stopped tracing the code for me. I think the technique's Heaven's Gate, and I didn't recognize it at the time. Yeah, there it is. So I mean, that's the kind of a write-up where you could actually take the sample, you could follow along with the reversing. I think it's like 95% there. There might be a few gaps, but I think it became Heaven's Gate, which I just didn't recognize at the time. So then folks started blogging about this Heaven's Gate technique, and I don't remember the exact timeline, but I was like, oh crap, that's the thing I ran into. I just didn't recognize it. So
that was me. It could have been called Josh's Gate.
Yeah, right. I don't know. I mean, it was in that same timeline. I think I came across a sample because at the time it was recent, that they were just using that technique. So it's really neat, and that's the kind of stuff that you just don't know until you know about it, and you learn about some of the limitations of your tools, and you learn a little bit about the operating system. You learn a little about the architecture. I didn't know I could just simply return from in a 32-bit code, 32-bit program. I could just return to 64-bit code, and that's what it did in the same memory space. It just makes the switch. So
that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and then when you figure that out, it's like, oh, that is really cool, and I feel like I've really accomplished something because I'm understanding how this is now unraveling. So then, kind of midway through the unpacking, now you shift gears. You're doing 64-bit code, and you can continue to unravel it. And all of that was just a downloader. So it was just one URL that it was trying to download the next stage from.
I say it all the time on Simply Cyber's First Things First, the morning broadcasting I do. I don't support threat actors' behavior, but I do respect and hat tip to their innovation and their approach to always pushing the fold forward on their techniques. It's why we have a job, right, Josh? But they're so clever. They're so innovative. I just wish they would apply it to the good side instead of the dark side. But so Josh, we're almost out of time, but there is an incredible swell of support for you to come back on the channel. So if you're cool with that, we will definitely have to do it. I know it only took us 14 months to get this sorted out, but I think we could do it if you want to kind of do a reversing 2.0. I'll engage the Simply Cyber community on the Discord server and ask them, you have a million different things you could talk about, right? Specific malware techniques and toolbox and whatnot. So we'll definitely bring you back on if you're interested, but I want to give you, a minute here. The stage is yours, Josh. Anything that you'd like to share with the Simply Cyber community? Maybe upcoming project. I know you've got a training in May that we talked about earlier. So I'll give you the floor. Take as much time as you want, and I'll come back when you're ready.
Okay, well, I've got 20 slides I'd like to discuss. I'm just kidding. No, I appreciate that. You've really motivated me, Jerry, watching everything you've done. I can remember calls we had, it seems like not that long ago, but a couple of years where you were really just getting into building Simply Cyber and doing all of the great stuff you do on YouTube and other platforms. And so it's really been, inspirational for me. And so I'm trying to do a little bit more of it on my own YouTube channel, or at least live streaming. I'm still figuring it out, but I'd like to, because I get asked these kind of questions a lot. How do I get started? Where's a good place to start? So doing a little bit more of that in an interactive setting, so that folks can actually follow along and ask questions, and we can do some of the basic things, right? Write simple programs, look at the assembly, talk through some of the nuances there. I do have a training coming up with cyber defenders. If you go to their site, you can check it out. That is available come the first week of May, and it's not. I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of content that we can cover that doesn't necessarily get real deep into reversing with tools like IDA. This is kind of that course. We talk a lot about maldocs, initial delivery stuff, looking a little bit of shell code. We do touch on architecture and RE stuff, but it's not the focus. There's a more advanced course that I save for doing that sort of deep dive stuff, which there's also an offering coming up this summer with Ring Zero. And that's exciting because the plan is to be back in person at the Ring Zero event in Las Vegas around the same time as DEF CON and Black Hat. So all of that is live. Jerry, I forgot to share a link with you, but you can Google Ring Zero and be able to find that. Yeah, that's really all the biggest stuff. Pretty regular poster on social media. I keep it to just the cybersecurity, so you don't have to worry about too much of my personal life bleeding into that. So if anyone has any questions, any comments, anything I can help with, please feel free to reach out to me in any venue, LinkedIn, Twitter. Probably have some overlap in Discords and Slacks that were out there. And yeah, there it is. So
I'm trying to pull you up right now so people can see.
I should
be. There you are. Yeah, look at you. Your pretty face.
Young face.
So there you go. You'll be right there. And I mean, guys, like Josh, obviously, just from this talk, you understand Josh knows what he's talking about. But Josh, as far as I know, you're a trainer at Black Hat every year. You train in Hack the Box in Amsterdam, or was it called Hack the Box when you went to Amsterdam?
Hack in the Box.
Hack in the Box, yeah. So I mean, this is what you do, and you're very, very good at it. So, anyways, definitely check out his stuff. There have been multiple links dropped throughout chat. If you didn't get those links, or you don't know, go ahead and hit !Discord. Nightbot will tell you the Discord link to go over. You can get onto Discord and ask me, and I will gladly share this with you. Obviously, you can also watch the stream on replay. So, Josh, I really genuinely appreciate you being here. Thanks so much. I'm gonna tease to my audience what some upcoming stuff. Actually, I'll just leave you here. Normally I drop you to the green room, but we are close friends, so hang with me here for a second, guys. Sure. Next week we'll be in April, everybody. Speaking of actually malware analysis, right? Some of you may remember Intezer. I've covered it on the channel a few times. It's unfortunate. Well, Josh, I don't know if you're familiar with Intezer, but basically they have a couple different features, but they're like a malware analysis platform that uses assembly and genes, like from the code, to identify what the malware family is. So basically, I find a piece of malware, I would very much enjoy to reverse it, but instead I take it and drop it in Intezer, and like 10 seconds later, they tell me that it's like, Loki bot or whatever, right? And gives me TTPs and IOCs and everything like that. So this is Ari and Roy. They are the VP of research and the CTO of the company. By the way, Roy is also a Simply Cyber community member. So what's up, Roy? They're going to be talking about the modern SOC analyst workflow. So things have kind of evolved. We got way more telemetry now, but what do we do with all that telemetry besides just get overwhelmed? A lot of false positives, a lot of burnout and stuff like that. So these individuals, they work a lot with SOCs, big SOCs, little SOCs, international SOCs, and they're going to come on and talk about false positives, incident prioritization, and really what the modern SOC looks like. So if you're interested in working in a SOC, or if you do work in a SOC, and it doesn't look like this, there might be some opportunities to bring evolution and maturity to your organization. So I'm super pumped to bring those guys on. So that'll be next Thursday's Simply Cyber live stream. And then obviously, guys, every weekday morning, I'm doing this live stream cybersecurity threat briefing. Josh, I know you're not on East Coast time, so it might be hard for you to get over there, but come over sometime and say what's up, dude. It's a good time. Go to simplycyber.io/FTF, and it will take you right to the next upcoming cybersecurity threat briefing link. And you can see there, it's usually 8 a.m. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 10 a.m. Tuesday and Thursday, Eastern Standard Time. So come join us. Have a good time. Get some cybersecurity news and have a good time. All right. That's going to do it for this week's Simply Cyber. Our guest has been Dr. Josh Stroschein. Josh, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jerry. And definitely, I would love to come back. So whenever it works in your schedule, I won't be a pain like last time. And
well, maybe we can get the tech stack working so we could do a demo next time.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm using Firefox. I'm going to blame that because it's just not sharing my screen properly.
No problem. All right, everybody. Until next time, stay secure.